Welcome to Divisionalysis. I'm Fog. One of the comments in my last video said math fight, and I actually thought that's a great idea. So today, math fight, burst DPS calculations versus little old me and how I do it. Let's go. Okay, the arena for the math fight today is going to be based on this build. A St. Elmo's build, Coyote's Mask, Obliterate, set at the stats that I recommended in my Coyote's video, 52, 173, in this case it's 172.8. And because it came up so much in the comments on my St. Elmo's video, I'm going to compare it to a FAMAS with fast hands and with perfect focus. Now, we're going to be basing this in the range, so all the targets are going to be at exactly 15 meters, engaging the mid-range buff for Coyotes 100% of the time. So, if I can get this build to be exactly 50% crit chance, it's going to have a 2% crit chance advantage over the St. Elmo's build. And I'm actually going to be able to do that to get it exactly to 50%. And the FAMAS also has 2% expertise on it, which the St. Elmo's does not. So that's the stats for the builds. 2% expertise advantage, 2% crit chance advantage to the FAMAS Fast Hands Perfect Focus build. And this is going to be the basis for the math fight. 5117, or what will be 60-127 with the Coyotes buff, versus 60-182.8 for the St. Elmo's build. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the shooting range to be very hard, to replicate as close as we possibly can a legendary encounter. Now obviously it doesn't match exactly, but in order to do the comparison, what we need to do is either set the amount of time that a weapon has available to it in order to do the most damage, or a certain amount of damage to do, and it is going to be based on the quickest time. Now you can think about these 6 heroic enemies in a number of different ways, but essentially what it amounts to is 60 million, or just shy of 60 million health points. Now those 60 million health points, you can think of those as being 4 solo legendary elite enemies. You could think about it in 4-man scaling heroic as being 3.5 enemies, or you can think about it in solo heroic as being 3 named enemies. However you want to think about this, this is the encounter that I'm testing today. So this is the arena. Is either 6 solo heroic, 4 solo legendary, 3.5 4-man heroics, or it's 3 named enemies. And these builds and these weapons have encountered this situation, and it is our job to work out who is going to kill these enemies quickest. If you're watching now and you watch my channel regularly, you're a fucking nerd, and I know that you love this numbers shit. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to calculate, however it is that you calculate it, the DPS of these 2 builds, and come up with a prediction of who you think is going to win this race. Now what haters of my channel want you to believe is that they all do the burst DPS and the sustained DPS calculations the same way. Damage, total magazine damage, divided by time to fire that magazine. But when you finish these calculations, call up your mates, get on Discord, chat, and see what results you have and compare them to each other, and I bet you every single fucking one of you has different results to the others. Because the question is, what damage? What damage am I multiplying by the number of rounds in the magazine? How have you worked out the damage that applies? And the devil is in the details. But I'm going to give you a massive, massive hand with these calculations by removing a shit ton of the variables and those details, because we're doing this in the range. So in the question of what damage, here is a non-exhaustive list of everything that will affect your damage in-game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 10 runs with each build and weapon in a string. The first one is not going to count, and I'll tell you why in a second. So there'll be 9 runs that we'll be averaging times over in order to remove RNG as much as possible. So we can't remove it completely, but we'll remove it as much as we possibly can. Rounds on target, you are going to have to put up with my ability and my skill level to get rounds on target in the shooting range. Headshots, I'm going to remove that completely. So my skill as far as getting headshots and the weapon's ability to get headshots are completely removed from the equation. No headshots, body shots only. The next big one we're going to remove is uptime, and I see this completely ignored so often, but I'm going to do everybody a favor and remove uptime, which means that I'm going to, that first run, I'm going to stack strikers and I'm going to stack obliterate, I'm going to stack perfect focus as much as I possibly can, and then the next runs are going to be all at full stacks. So we're only concerned with fully stacked runs. So uptime's completely removed. Now normally you would have to think about the target's position, but we're in the range, so they are 100% out of cover. Removed. You would normally have to think about the distance to the target, because that'll affect coyotes, it'll also affect optimal range of the weapon. Don't have to worry about it. Targets are set at 15 meters, but according to coyotes, they are at the mid-range buff 100% of the time. Another variable completely removed. The target's total health points, normally you would have to account for variation depending on the targets. We don't have to. It's exactly the same target 6 times over. Target's armor, health, whether they've got armor plate, again, a complete variable in the game depending on how often you encounter a certain enemy type. In this time, in the range, 100% solo, heroic, elite enemies, meaning that their armor to health ratio is 71%. 71% of their total HP will be damage to armor, and then 29% of their HP will be damage to health. Done. And they don't have any weak points. So we can completely remove all of these variables that I would normally try to account for, average, or do the best that I possibly can in order to get them to accurately reflect in-game percentages, but we don't have to. Everything is set. That's the controlled situation that we have in the firing range. Right, just to be clear, weapon-based damage set at 44,191 for both weapons. They're exactly equal. The all-weapon damage for the St. Elmo's is 100%. For the FAMAS is 102% because it includes the 2% expertise. Specific weapon damage for both weapons is 30%, made up of 15% from the specialization and 15% from the weapon itself. Total weapon damage, because we have excluded uptime as a factor, the perfect focus build will have 60% at max stats total weapon damage. The St. Elmo's build will only have 25% from obliterate. Amplified damage, both builds will have 100% amplified damage from strikers. Crit damage, I've already stated those figures, but inclusive of the Coyotes buff, 182.8 for the St. Elmo's, 127 for the FAMAS. Crit chance for both weapons will be maxed out at 60%. Magazine size for the FAMAS 50, for the St. Elmo's 70. Reload speed, you will have to calculate this based on the talents that are on the build and also the gear talents and gear attributes and specialization talents in order to work out what you're going to base your calculations on. And the rate of fire will also be affected by gear talents and specialization talents, but the base rate of fire is as it reads on the box for the weapon, 900 for the FAMAS, 850 for the St. Elmo's. Everything else is up to you. Stop the video, calculate, come back. I'm going to go away and do those calculations, and I'm going to come back and tell you what I got for burst DPS and sustained DPS. I'll show you what my calculations came out at, and then we will see the results of the test. So in the original version of this video that I made, I put all of my calculations in and showed you exactly how I end up with the results that I come up with. That is for burst DPS, for sustained DPS, and also for my calculations as well as far as getting to a result. That video ended up being over an hour long, so I've created a separate video which I'm not listing publicly. But you have the link to that video in the description. I encourage you, if you're interested, and you are one of those fucking nerds that I know that you are, to have a look at that, especially if my burst DPS and my sustained DPS results differ from yours. You can work out why that is based on my calculations. So enough chit chat. It's time for a fight.
In attendance and the millions watching around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
So all calculations started off with the same average bullet damage, and that was 674,598 for the FAMAS and 621,764 for the St. Elmo's, giving on bullet damage alone an 8.5% advantage to the FAMAS. The burst DPS calculation calculated that the FAMAS would be 12,142,764, and for the St. Elmo's just 10,569,988, meaning a 14.9% advantage for the FAMAS. But when you get into the calculations, you quickly realise that you can't use a burst DPS calculation because it exceeds the amount that the FAMAS and the St. Elmo's can do within one magazine. So we have to move to the sustained DPS calculation, and that calculation predicted 9,178,204 for the FAMAS and a 17.2% advantage over the St. Elmo's at just 7.83 million in DPS. When I ran the situation through my calculations, I worked out that it was going to be 7.3 million DPS for the FAMAS and 7.3 million for the St. Elmo's, meaning that I expected them to get almost exactly the same amount of time, or to take exactly the same amount of time across, or average across all 9 runs. Here is the last 4 of those runs. I'm not going to put you through all of them, but here is the last 4 of those runs for each weapon and build. The 9-run total time for the FAMAS, 77.4 seconds. The 9-run total time for the St. Elmo's, 76.7 seconds. A 1% win for the St. Elmo's against the FAMAS with perfect focus and fast hands fully stacked. Now when we include the 10th run, here's a look at those. The 10-run total time for the FAMAS, 89.8 seconds. 10 runs for the St. Elmo's, 88.4. A 1.6% win for the St. Elmo's when you include the uptime of the two talents, or their building time. So what that works out to be is fully stacked, the FAMAS averaged 6.9 million DPS, and the St. Elmo's 6.97 million. And when you include the stacking phase, 6.6 million for the FAMAS, 6.7 million for the St. Elmo's. So what went wrong? There are quite a few things that I include as part of my variables, which you can see in that other video that you've got the link for, but I'll give you the two major factors that affected the ability of the sustained DPS calculation to calculate correctly who was going to win this race by quite a margin. If you have a look at it, the sustained DPS calculation between what it calculated and what the achieved DPS is actually 30%. Over 30% inaccurate. Factor number 1. Okay, you're going to see two quick clips. The first one is me in the firing range. Just have to tell me what my accuracy is. The next one is a short, very short clip from my legendary that you've been watching. And again, just tell me what my accuracy is. So in the firing range, you would expect that I'd be able to get 100% rounds on target, right? My accuracy for what you just saw was in fact 88%. Have you ever wondered why you feel like you're beaming enemies and then you look at your stats at the end of a mission and it says that you've got like 64% accuracy or something like that? That is because of this principle. The FAMAS that I'm using in the firing range is firing 18 rounds per second. I have to hold down the trigger and deliver the rounds in order to kill it. If I wanted to be able to deliver only the minimum, remember I'm firing 18 bullets a second, and I have to be sure that I kill it, because if I stop firing, that's definitely going to be way more time lost than what it is to make sure that I actually kill the target. So in every single case, my reaction times are not quick enough to be able to deliver the necessary bullets and stop. What's happened is on average I've delivered 12% more rounds to a target that is already dead, and I've overkilled in every single case because I have to. I have to make sure not killing that target actually has pretty significant consequences. You ready for the next one? Here we go. Now here's the clip, slowed down to 1/10 the time. The rounds on target are actually 30%, and I beamed this dude. Here it is, frame by frame. I start with a full mag of 71 and I finish with 61. The counter has trouble keeping up. It seems like massive overkill when you slow it right down, but all of this overkill occurs in about 0.3 of a second. Here it is again in real time. Now in the St. Elmo's versus FAMAS battle, it's not that big of a deal, but the thing is that the FAMAS is the faster race car. Except it has the same brakes as the St. Elmo's, which is my reaction time. Which means that every time this occurs, the FAMAS will lose more bullets than the St. Elmo's. And it happens quite a lot. In general gameplay, you're going to find that you're going to have targets in front of other targets. And you will continue to shoot through those enemies even though they're already dead, trying to get to the target behind them. In reality, this portion to accuracy probably makes up a larger percentage to your missed bullets than what does actually just missing the target. And this brings us to the most significant and fatal flaw of a burst and sustained DPS calculation. If you have less rounds in your magazine actually doing damage, then a more significant weight is placed on how large your magazine is and then how quickly you can reload that magazine and get back into the fight. In the case of a burst DPS calculation, those are two factors that are completely ignored. So much so that it can't even tell the difference when it's the same weapon. So I've got a full Chad build on here. All damage, all the time. But what's most important is that the only difference between these two examples is I'm just going to have a different amount of bullets in the magazine. A burst DPS calculation will tell you there's no difference between these two setups. Here you can see 40 round mag. I'm producing results around about the 5 million mark, whatever, doesn't matter, against this named enemy. Now all I'm going to do is just simply change the size of the magazine. And because a burst DPS calculation will just adjust the amount of mag damage and then divide by the greater amount of mag time to fire it, there's no difference. But what you can clearly see from the results is there is a massive difference in the actual DPS that you will produce. And this has always been my largest problem with this calculation, and it's a massive gaping hole. Total mag damage over time to fire the magazine. You adjust one and you just end up adjusting the other. In the case of the two FAMASes with just a different mag on, all you do is you are doing 40 times the damage to work out the total mag damage, and you're dividing by 2.66 seconds. In the case of the 50 round mag, it's 50 times the damage, and now you're dividing by 3.33 seconds. Now just to be clear, how did we get those seconds? We divided the number of bullets in the magazine by the time to fire them. So no matter what you do, your answer will always be the damage times the rounds per second. Now clearly, in this very instance, it makes a massive difference. there is no consideration for how long you can maintain that damage for. The equation itself destroys the most important information. And in the case of the FAMAS versus the St. Elmo's, 50 times damage over 50 divided by rounds per second. Of course, it's going to give you damage times round per second. St. Elmo's, 70 times damage over 70 divided by rounds per second gives you damage times round per second. No consideration whatsoever for the fact that the FAMAS at base RPM can only maintain for 3.33 seconds, whereas the St. Elmo's can maintain that damage for 4.94 seconds. So when making comparisons, even on the same weapon with different magazine size, but especially between different weapons, the magazine size is completely destroyed by the equation, essentially reducing it down to a 1 second comparison. But that 1 second comparison is only valid for the period of time of the shortest firing time, because after that, the DPS of the shortest firing time weapon is now changed by the fact that it has stopped doing damage. And unfortunately for the burst DPS calculation, even if you were comparing over just the time that the shortest firing time weapon was firing, when you reduce the amount of time, factors like the first bullet cycle and the last bullet's damage overkill become much more significant, which could essentially almost be ignored at much larger scales. So over the time period where burst DPS might produce an accurate result for comparison purposes, how relevant that short period of time is completely irrelevant for this conversation. But even over those very short periods of time, other factors now play more of a major part, which makes even that comparison an inaccurate one. And that's why in the math fight, it was a completely unfair fight. No matter how accurately you got your damage figure to be, and believe me, if you watch the other video, I tried, there is no way that this calculation will provide you either an accurate result, and most definitely not a result that you can compare weapons or builds. I can't think of any other way to say the same thing over and over and over again. And I personally am excited about the fact that I'm discovering new things about this game that we thought we knew and we thought were fact for the last 4 years. If you want to use burst DPS and sustained DPS calculations, fill your boots. But if you want to post a comment on my channel page, or you want to make a video about me and my work based on those calculations, just stop. Don't. My answer in advance is I respectfully disagree. If, on the other hand, you want to have a legitimate discussion about genuinely moving the community's knowledge of this game forward, I am here for you. I don't know everything. I don't always get it right, but I've spent a lot of time looking at this stuff. So if we both don't know, maybe we can work it out together. If you like the video, then hit the thumbs up. If you want to see more of me, then please hit the subscribe. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Fog out.